Hello and welcome to this Intelligent Briefing. I'm Jess Phillips, Director of Strategic Content at Lynchburn Media. In this edition of our Deep Dive series, I'm speaking with Nicholson, Senior Director Product Management at Server Technology. He tells us today how data center managers can create a power strategy that will future-proof their infrastructure. Could you just introduce yourself and your role within your company, please?
Yeah, so my name is Nicholson. I'm the Senior Director of Product Management for one of the Legrand Group companies called PAC, Power Access and Control, which really encompasses the Realtime and the Server Technology brand PDUs.
Brilliant. So first up, let's talk uptime. How important is uptime, continued uptime for data centers, and what are some of the factors that influence uptime?
Well, obviously, as a data center manager, it might be the quickest way to have issues or possibly lose your job if you don't guarantee uptime. If we look at the products that Server Technology and Realtime provide, we're kind of the last chain in that critical physical infrastructure. So, all the redundancy brought all the way down to the cabinet is really the power distributed out to the devices. So it's critical, and there's a number of things that influence it. Most of our customers use two PDUs, obviously, an A and a B feed. They can be from two separate grids or one grid and a UPS or whatever the situation is. One of the key elements that we find is that when you load those PDUs, if you do have a power failure, you really want to load each side to 40% of the load, so that when you get a failure and one PDU is picking up the whole cabinet's load, you're running roughly 80% of the load, which is what the National Electric Code, at least in the States, says you're allowed to run at. Above 80, you're not allowed to run continuously. So it's really as simple as knowing the overall KW, distributing that load evenly, making sure that whoever configures the cabinet or the smart hands powers them, plugs them in properly, and then making sure that that is distributed properly over both of the PDUs within the cabinet.
So how far does real-time monitoring reduce the risk of downtime, and what tools can data center managers use to assist with this specifically?
Well, real-time monitoring for us can be power, but it can also be environmentals, right? So we know that there's a focus today on saving money, and saving money is saving power, and that can be within the cabinet, and it also can be within, say, your cooling infrastructure. So for examples, we have a number of customers that are running at higher temperatures. The advantage of that is obviously you don't have to provide as much cooling, therefore you save power. But if you have a problem with your cooling system, it's very critical that you know right away that there is a problem. And if you get an intelligent PDU like the ones we provide, we have sensors for temperature and humidity and differential pressure and a bunch of different things. Here we're really referring to temperature, and you know that, okay, I've got a problem, and you can react before you have downtime or before you have a critical issue, and make sure that it doesn't daisy chain within your data center itself, as an example. And it also could be on the power monitoring side, right? We have everything from devices that'll measure at the outlet or the device level, the server level. And so we also know if there's a power failure or if a server's power supply has failed, and it's just running on one power supply, which it can be acceptable, but also you want to go in and fix that. So whether it's an open API or an SMP trap or however you want to do it, we can really provide the information of what's going on within the cabinet, and again, ensure that uptime and address problems quickly before they kind of become a bigger problem for the data center manager.
Can you introduce us to the PRO3X PDU and the challenges that this is setting out to overcome?
So one of our latest products in our line is we're calling the PRO3X PDU. One of our first PDUs that's really a hybrid design, taking some of the best of the Server Technology features and taking some of the best of the Realtime features. One of the things that we've done that's a little bit different is we're integrating mechanical locking for every outlet. So no more sourcing, locking cables in different lengths and different colors as an example. It's inherently built right into the PDU itself. And that really helps. We know that in the data center environment, the more people that are in the data center, frankly, the more problems you're going to have. And we have a lot of big customers that implement freezes certain times of the year when critical things are going on to keep people out of the data center. So with locking outlets, cables can't be bumped or pulled by accident, as an example. The other thing we've done is we've really incorporated our HDOT and our HDOT-CX technology, which is kind of a custom outlet that we've patented. And it allows for a lot of flexibility in the number and the outlet types. It allows for higher density, more outlets in a smaller space. And the hybrid CX outlet can act as a C13 or a C19. So you've got a lot of flexibility in what you're plugging into that PDU itself. So those are key. We've also incorporated the Xeris network card in it as well. So kind of the best of both worlds slowly coming together in a single device or technology for our group.
Could you share maybe a couple more examples of use cases of how this technology is being used?
Sure. Well, so it's PDU and it's in a data center cabinet, right? So whether you are looking at, say, a cloud application, whether it's an in-house cloud or whether it's somebody else's cloud, behind that environment, there's a PDU, right? And so some of the same things that I mentioned with the power and the environmental and the other monitoring is going on behind the scenes in the cloud environment. When you get into a data center application, whether it's a typical data center that you own or maybe a co-location, these same technologies are being used, but in a different way. So in a co-location facility, which may be down the street or down the block or 100 miles away, we do find a lot of focus on monitoring, making sure the colo meets their SLAs. And we also see a lot more switch products, where if you have a problem, you can do a remote reboot and get the device back up and running and not have to go to the colo facility, as an example. In a lot of regular data centers, power monitoring is key down to the device level. So we see a little bit more of that, what we call our POPs, our per outlet power technology, where you can look at the power load, whether it is a device or a group of devices or an application, and understand the efficiency, how those devices are being used, and you can move loads so that you can make sure that you increase the efficiency and therefore save power. So there's a lot of different ways. Again, it really comes down to what the customer wants to focus on, what is important to them, what their SLAs are, and what they're trying to accomplish. So we really do everything from very basic dumb PDUs all the way up to the most intelligent monitoring, whether it's cameras or door locks or power or environmentals or turning things on and off, and then really stage the products in between. So you can kind of pick and choose what you're interested in doing based on what your requirements are.
So how does this kind of technology ultimately enable the likes of smart cities and emerging technologies such as edge computing?
So that's a good point. So if you look at edge computing and what everybody's talking about with artificial intelligence, AI, right? You're really bringing the compute closer to where it's needed. So let's say in AI, maybe it's a self-driving truck, right, with a ton of data. And we know for a long time that some of this has been going on, say, in stages. I remember one time talking to a truck driver, and he mentioned that he had an incident where he had to slam on his brakes, and then a few minutes later, his phone in his truck rang. What happened? What were you doing? Well, multiply that, right? So now you've got a huge amount of data. You're tracking all that data that the truck's bringing back, and now you're taking that data and you're putting it someplace, whether it's for storage or monitoring or to understand how the truck can be more fuel efficient or whatever it is. That's all done at an edge data center, right? That bandwidth and that amount of data can't be distributed huge distances. So really for edge and AI, it can be a regular data center, it can be a smaller data center, but it's really closer to where it's needed, right? And you can also argue that it ties into somewhat of Internet of Things, right? Where also you've got a large number of devices and the compute needs to be closer to those devices. So I think it's really an enabling technology. And we're really just starting to see the uses, right? I think we've all seen the videos where the guy is in the self-driving car and he's asleep on the freeway, but the car is going, right? So I think we all have our concerns, but no doubt it's enabling these things to happen, and it's moving much faster, I think, than most of us really realize.
Moving back to the data center then, how does flexibility extend the life of a data center, and how does the PRO3X enable this?
So that's a great point. So being part of the critical physical infrastructure, the PDU is going to stay and last roughly the life of the cabinet, right? So it's going to be in there and it's going to be mounted in there, and there's going to be upgrades. We know that a good chunk of our customers refresh the IT roughly every 3 to 5 years, depending on what they're doing. So I mentioned the H.dot and the H.CX outlets earlier, right? So let's take an example of that. So let's say we've got a 36 outlet product and it's got half regular H.C13s, and let's say it's got half or 18 of the outlets are H.CXs that can be a C13 or a C19. So that one PDU can act as all 36 C13s, or it can act as at least half of the outlets being a C19. So when you're an installation, you may need just a few C19s because you don't have a lot of high power density, let's say. But now you do a refresh and maybe you put some blades or something in there and you need a little more kW. You've got the C19s that are available to support that. So if you put technologies that are flexible like that in your data center, when you do refreshes, you're not refreshing everything. It's really growing and being flexible, like you said, with the application, and therefore makes it easier when you've got these upgrades.
Absolutely. And with all that in mind then, what would be your best practice advice for data center managers to ensure that they're creating a power strategy that will future-proof their infrastructure?
You know, that opens up a broad scope, right? So one of the first things that I would say is really the power structure, right? So everybody's worried about efficiency and saving money and at some level saving the planet, right? I think that's a key thing for many of our customers. So I would first off look at what the density is for the cabinet, and I would also look at what the future density is for the cabinet, kW wise. And many of our customers are going with 400 volt solutions in North America, which is what the rest of the world is already doing, right? So when you bring 480 power into the data center, you don't convert it all the way down to 120 essentially for a typical 208 application. So there's efficiency gains of bringing the power in at 480 and just converting it down to 400 or 415. If you look at the devices themselves, believe it or not, they run more efficient at higher voltages. So instead of running a server at 120 or 208, if you run it at 230 or 240 volts, then you have an efficiency there. So when you stack up all those efficiencies, it really adds, especially when you're using thousands of kWs like data centers do. So first I would look at power infrastructure and I'd make a smart decision there, and I would make a decision that will help with efficiency within the infrastructure itself, right? So that's a key element. Then, as I mentioned, on the PDU side, I would look at technologies like integral locking that we've mentioned, the H.dot, the H.CX for the flexibility of outlets and the devices that you can plug in. And then also, again, what you're trying to do. Do you want to remotely tune things on and off? If you're thinking about understanding the power usage, look at a product that can measure power, whether it's at the in-feed, which is pretty much typical for an overall capacity, but also at the outlet level. So again, you can look at your power usage. In many cases, if you look at the internal structure of a company, people want a ton of compute until they're asked to pay for it. And then all of a sudden they don't need 6 cabinets, maybe they need 2, or maybe they're going to be built back for that power usage, which with a device that monitors at the outlet, it really allows you to do that. So in some ways you can drive some efficiency because a server sitting in your data center idle, not doing anything, still uses roughly about half the power that it does if we're doing something. So an idle server using half its power, you don't want a bunch of zombies or servers not doing anything sitting around in your data center. So there's decision you can make that will help drive efficiency both on the power chain, like the 400 volts that I mentioned, but also in the application of the devices themselves. I think that it's all dealing with really planning and what you're trying to do. So if the customer can set some clear goals of what they're trying to do, some may make sense, some may make maybe a little pie in the sky, but we love to hear those things. Approach a vendor that's willing to work with you. A lot of the solutions we do are out of the box, and that's could be for lead time and other things. But we also do a ton of solutions that are custom, right? So we have a lot of customers that may be using CPUs or GPUs and have very high density, or maybe they've got a high outlet count that they want to get in a smaller cabinet, or whatever it is. We do a ton of custom solutions just to meet those applications. And we do those every day, and we do them really pretty quickly for what you get. So work with a vendor that'll look at what your needs are, find the right solution. If the demand's high enough, you're not going to do it for 10 PDUs, but for a larger number of PDUs, we can often offer a custom solution to meet that exact customer's needs.